Hi everybody. Again, I just passed out a handout to you because of course I missed the deadline for getting that in your folders. I'm that guy for this presentation. I'm also the one who tries to persuade you today that not only should you put writing into your Maymester course, but you can actually do that and not kill yourself. There are ways to make this functionally happen. So to get us started, and again, Donna's talked about some of this already, you probably have course goals set up, either from your department or for your personal course or for your students, that revolve around these four things. That the students will know and learn something, that they will practice certain things, that they will learn something in your course or do something in the course that will move them forward in terms of your department and the curriculum, and that they'll probably do something that's very pragmatic for their business or career or life beyond. So most of you have these goals. So here is my, oh so quick, 2-minute question for you. How does your writing assignment for your course fulfill those goals? So if you're putting together your assignment, what should it look like? What can we do to enable students to, as best as possible, actually do the assignment that we're setting out? Some of this sounds painfully obvious, but if you don't already, you should think of your assignment sheet as a model for what you want students to do. So often I see instructors who have giant bold and symbols and pictures, and if that's not what you want your students to do, then your assignment sheet is stupid. Your assignment sheet is a model. Whatever you want students to produce, consider things like font and style and size. Think about organization and how you're most going to effectively get your students to find those things. I know that none of us in this room would ever do this, but I've seen faculty members whose assignments look like essays. They're 4 pages long and they're huge paragraphs. And if you have to put that much information in your assignment, something else is wrong with the course. You're missing instruction somewhere, you're missing reading somewhere. Something isn't happening that should be. Because your assignment should be an assignment. It shouldn't be everything that's happened in the course so far. And those big paragraphs make it very difficult for the students to really figure out what it is that you as the instructor want. So my guidelines I always give to faculty are be concise. 1 to 2 single-sided pages or 1 page double-sided is more than enough in almost all cases. Your assignment sheet is also a transaction model, which means you need to state what students should produce. You also need to state what the assignment is. It sounds so silly. But I see people who say things like, write a memoir in which you analyze and dissect the following things, and then as you do that, be sure to describe and discuss how that relates to readings, and then go on to these other 5 things. That's a lot of little assignments and things that are happening, but it's not what the assignment is. So figure out what that assignment is. Is it an interview? Is it a write-up of the interview? Is it a blog? What is that thing? And tell the student that's what they're doing. Research shows that speaking directly to the student in your assignment of prompts is also the most effective tone and voice to go with. So if you're using either an imperative, like compose a report that does this, or speaking directly to them, you will be evaluated on these elements. Students are more likely to read that as a conversation and as an instruction to follow, because this is the language you would use if you were sitting one-on-one in a conference talking. So assignment sheet design. Top of the page. Give course-specific information. Just like you would when you're putting together your syllabus. You're having things like your course title, your course name, your instructor name. And again, this probably sounds kind of silly because you're thinking, well, I handed it to them in class. They're going to know it's for my class. Or it's up on Canvas. It's already there. And that is really what should be true. But our students are busy. 90% of our students work. Maybe full-time, maybe part-time, but 90% of our students are working. Most of them have families, lives, other obligations. And while we want to assume that our course is super important and special, most of our students are going to take your assignment sheet, shove it in their backpack, go to work, go home, see their family, go to their girlfriend's house, come back, and then pull out this paper and go, oh God, what was this about? So if you just have some of that simple information, it helps orient the student. And even if this is up on Canvas, a lot of your students print out their Canvas materials and put them down next to them while they're typing at a computer. So having that printout is helpful. And again, you do this just to help orient your student, just to get them initially focused. Beneath that information, I'd recommend that you have a background section. A section of your assignment sheet that relates this assignment to the course to date and discusses some of what's been going on. So one of the things that you want students to be able to do when they're starting your assignment and working on it is to be in that sort of proximal zone of development. That place where they're already thinking about your course and they're already remembering what's being discussed and what the readings are. And if you can give them a short paragraph up at the top or a bulleted list, whatever this is, that says, so, this is your second assignment. It fits in sequence in this way. And remember, we've been reading, this book and this chapter, and see how these are going to help inform your practice. We've been working towards these goals. look at last lecture, we discussed some of this information. If you can help orient them, they're much more likely to be able to understand where that fits in the sequence, what it's doing in your course, and they're much more likely to be able to complete that assignment. If you do have an imagined context, so some faculty have things where you're writing as if it's a letter to the editor, or as if it's going to the city council, as if it will be published. Maybe this background section is where you're describing that imagined context. You're laying that detail out for the student. And again, the point here is simply to activate the student's prior knowledge. You don't want them picking up that assignment sheet and saying, all right, I've got to write this. It's analysis, let's go. You want them to start off saying, all right, what do I know about this class? What have I been thinking about? How is this analysis part of it? Just helps them get ready. Beneath the background, you should have an assignment. Your assignment should actually say what the assignment is, which means clear and concise. My advice is always to use headings and subheadings and bullets to organize your assignment and any details, only because the information in those paragraphs, again, is so hard to pull out. It's just so much quicker seeing that quick list. And again, I know none of us do this, but take a look at your assignment sheet and ask yourself, is this really necessary? Do I really need this much detail? Because I know even in my assignments that I've used for years, I'll come back and I'll be thinking about it and I'll look at it again and I'll go, why am I even saying this? I don't need this in order to complete it. And so don't waste those words and space. Just help them get focused as quickly as possible. I also advise instructors to avoid just randomness. I see instructors who have this 2-page assignment and there's things that are just in bold over here and in bold down here and underlined down here. If you want to make things important, that's fine. You can make them important. But just as if you were reading and grading a student's document, you would look for consistency in format and how things are organized. And you should apply those same things to your assignment sheet. If you're going to bold things, fine. Bold your heading, or bold that most important thing in the assignment, but don't just randomly apply those. And again, I know that's not us. We would never do such a thing. In your assignment, I'd like you to think about choosing a specific noun. What is this assignment? And again, I sort of said that already about your assignment title, what is this thing? But pick that noun and call it what it is. So if you're having students write an argumentative research paper, fine. Call it an argumentative research paper. And just call it that. Don't refer to it as an essay or a critique or an analysis later on. Call it what it is and stick with that thing. Also think about your verbs. Choose verbs that really describe what you want students to do, and choose verbs that match those assignment goals. My advice is typically 1 to 3 verbs. And the reason for this is because your students will actually try to do what you ask them to do. And if you have 17 verbs in there, they will try to do those 17 verbs. And that can get very confusing, and typically it's not really what you're asking students to do anyway. This is the old version of Bloom's taxonomy, and I like it in part because it's simple and fits in this nice little chart. So here's what I'd like you to do. I'm going to have you just take a minute again and think to yourself. You have that assignment in your head. What are you asking them to do? What verb in here describes your assignment? Are you asking them to write a summary, and that's what it is? They're going to summarize? Are you asking them to discuss things? And if you want, you can choose more than one. 15 is probably bad. But a couple that really fit your assignment. And I'll give you a minute to take a look at that list. The other thing that I like about Bloom's taxonomy in this version is that the things that are on your left with the evaluation and synthesis column are the harder, more difficult, more demanding things. The stuff towards the right is the easier, quicker, less demanding list. So everything on the left, if you were choosing things like, well, I want them to design and justify, those things on the left imply that everything this direction has already been known or done. And one of the biggest things that I see with faculty is the idea of analysis. Analysis is an important skill, and it looks different in different disciplines. But I see so many faculty say, analyze this. But the students haven't been prepared to do anything sort of left of analysis. So they're saying, well, okay, how do I analyze? Well, in order to do that, I have to be able to illustrate something. I have to be able to present that thing and tell you what it is or what it looks like. And that involves describing and comparing. Probably involves differentiation in some way. In order to do that, I've got to be able to name things and identify them and probably define them. But if you start thinking about these verbs in this list, again, hopefully one of the things this helps you do is think about, is it the correct verb? If it is, wonderful. If it is the correct verb, what should my students already know or be able to do? And am I helping them do that? Or has that already been accomplished in previous courses? Right. Back to your assignment sheet. If you don't already have this somewhere, have a requirements section. And this is just the basic thing, right? When is it due? Is there revision? If you're going to require a revision, you have to give feedback, and I'll come back to that later. If there's things that they should know, like it's got to be typed in double-spaced and it's 500 words and I want a specific citation style, tell them this. Now, this may already show up in your syllabus, and if it does, that's wonderful. But to be able to have that as part of your assignment, you have to reference the syllabus in the assignment. The assignment sheet actually has to say, please see syllabus for this information, so that students will go there. In terms of citation style and addition, if you don't already have a preferred citation style and you are asking students to research and cite, choose one. Just choose one. Please don't say, oh, go with whatever citation style you use, because most of your students don't have one. They don't. Pick one that's either appropriate to your discipline, because you think there's value in that, or pick one of the most common ones, like APA or MLA. If your student is in your major, choose the one for your major. And if you don't know what that is, or I can help you sort of pick a citation style appropriate, I can talk to you afterwards. But have a style, because your students don't already know one very well. They're just going to go out and randomly choose one. And all of this is, again, just to get the students to know when it's due. What do I have to do? When do I have to turn this into? What are you looking for? The assignment that's in front of you and in your little notes, this isn't a good assignment by any means. It has lots of problems as an assignment. But my question for you, just looking at these, is which one do you want to read? Anybody want to read the one on the right? I mean, you don't, right? Your assignment should not look like that, because your students don't want to read that either. Your students want to see the quick version. What am I doing? When is it due? What do I have to do to accomplish this? And again, this isn't a good assignment as an assignment. But if your assignment looks like this and they can find the information, they're much more likely to do what it is you're asking. Create time for response to your assignment. Most of us hand out assignments, and if you're in a class that's all semester, you probably physically hand it out. Maybe you talk about it in class, maybe you don't. A lot of us are now moving to Canvas, and for Maymester I would say, yes, put it on Canvas, please, have it be there. But think about ways that you can get students to engage your assignment. Just like earlier we talked about the syllabus, well, how might you get them to read it? There were suggestions about quizzes or contracts, right? If you can get your students to read your assignment when you give it out or when it's first assigned, they will think about it. It will stick in their head. It will not be the night before that they look it up and try to figure it out. So some of the ways you can do that are like an in-class activity. So if you're physically going to hand it out in class, you're going to talk about it in class, give your students 5 minutes. Say, great, get in groups. 5 minutes. When you're done, I want every group to have 2 questions about my assignment. Because I guarantee you your students have questions. They do. They're not going to ask you, but they have them. They're going to come and ask us at the Writing Center. And then we're going to call you. So give your students that chance. If you don't hand things out in class, consider putting this up on Canvas and having a discussion board. This was like 5 points, like something minimal, where you say every student has to write a question about the assignment that they're unclear about. You also need to think, especially in Maymester, about allowing adequate time for completion. And this is the biggest objection I hear to writing in Maymester, is that it's 12 days. My God, how do you think about something in 12 days enough to write about it, and then you as the instructor have time to read it and say something useful about it? And it's incredibly difficult. But I'd like you to think about, if you have a big assignment in your head, giving that complex assignment in stages. If your assignment is normally that 5 or 7 or 10 or 25-page seminar paper, what are the parts of that assignment? And how can you give students parts of that assignment and really teach them the same goals and skills, have the same sense of rigor, but do it in smaller chunks that are manageable for them in the timeline and manageable for you in terms of actually grading and responding. So, commenting and grading. Typically, there's 2 types of commenting strategies when you're looking at writing. One is evaluation, one is for revision. If you're commenting for evaluation, these are typically going to be your descriptive and focused and justifiable comments. You received an A because. Your B plus is because of this. And if you're commenting for evaluation, yes, this can be helpful, but you're probably also wasting a lot of time. Because this information is not as useful to students because most of them don't do anything with it. Now, if it's in a rubric and you can check these things off or mark them, that's great. I'm not saying there's no value. But if you're writing that big paragraph end comment and it's just for evaluation, you are wasting your time because your students aren't going to engage that as much. If you're writing comments for revision, you want to think about comments that are facilitative and focused. And what I mean by that is, don't give general comments. Your argument is weak. Well, that may indeed be the case. But if you don't tell them how or where or why, that information is useless. That's the same as saying, hey, good job on your paper. Well, thank you, right? What did I do that was good? Help me see that. I don't know. Achievable. Think about what can be done over the course of the semester, over the course of your class. What can they really accomplish that you're commenting on? And think about value added. And this is a piece that honestly I didn't think about for years, and I think most instructors don't think about when they comment. But it's that place of saying, you should do this, and you should do it because. Because it focuses the writing, because this is essential in my field, because this will help you down the road for these reasons. That value added component is one of the biggest motivators for students. How students read comments. So Storm mentioned something earlier about, most students don't want to read comments. And I'd say that sounds like a really accurate statistic to me. I would imagine that's true. But it's also true that most students don't want to be in your class and don't want to read your books and don't want to take your tests, right? So what is true of what the students want isn't necessarily what is good or best for them. So if you're going to give writing assignments, you ought to comment. You really should. However, unless you're going to require revision, students generally are not going to read your comments. And frankly, why would they? They're going to find a grade, right? I mean, why would I read that paragraph that you wrote in those little marginal comments if I'm not going to do anything with it? And there's an exception to that. The students who want to argue with you, right? They don't think their grade's right. They're going to go through and try to get a sense of that. Or if you buried that letter B+ down in your big paragraph, they're going to read it because they got to find their B+. But research actually shows that most students aren't going to spend any time at all to very, very little amount of time looking at your comments. But research does show that students tend to read marginal comments more than that big paragraph end comment. And that kind of makes sense because if you're like me, you're kind of lazy, and you tend to skim things, right? If I can read a small comment, I'll do that before I read your big one. It's just quicker. So students do tend to skim your marginal comments, but they read them out of context, which means they read your marginal comment, but they don't read the thing that it's next to in the margin. And I can tell you that most of your students don't actually read what they turn into you anyway. They write it, but they don't actually read it. They have not gone through and read it and understood it and revised it. And yes, I'm generalizing and there are exceptions. But most of them don't. They don't spend that time. All of this means that students pretty much perceive your comments as random. When you do make comments, they look at them and they say, it's just this instructor. It's this instructor who wants this, and that's just the way they are. None of my other instructors wanted that. So they don't understand that the comments are specific to things in the paper or to your course goals, and they also don't understand if they're individualized to you or they're universalized to your department or to writing in general. And some of that use value answers some of that for the students. It helps them see why this matters or what this is about. If you are going to read and comment, I would suggest you do it in two passes. Pass number one would be higher order concerns. So these are the things that you asked for probably in your assignment and those verbs. You asked them to argue, you asked them to synthesize, you asked them to critique. You're looking at sort of those upper level big issues. Does this work as an argument? Does this work as a paper? Most of us can do this, right? You do this in your discipline all the time. You have a sense of what this looks like, and that's great. But I think a lot of us also get bogged down in some of the lower order concerns. We see comments that are out of place. We have a pet peeve about that versus which. Whatever those sort of errors are. If you are going to comment on those lower order concerns, you're more than welcome to. It's perfectly fine. My suggestions for you, however, would be do it in a second pass. So read it for content and quality, and then go back through and look at those smaller things. Because if you don't, you will get them confused. It just happens. If you're going to look at those lower order concerns, focus on 3 issues or less. Which means the student may have 8 things wrong. That's just where they're at in their development. Fine. But if you mark all those 8 things and talk about those 8 things, it becomes overwhelming. If you can give them something that's there, and again, think about facilitative comments that explain why this is wrong, how to fix it, use value, why this matters to you as a reader or in writing, it will help them. Alright, so how do you make commenting work in Maymester? Or in any class, really? I would strongly encourage you to comment electronically. Most of us have bad handwriting, or maybe it's just me. But my students can't read my writing, because when I'm trying to comment, I write fast. And in fairness, my writing is abysmal. Commenting electronically, though, I can actually type faster than I can write, and I can actually speak faster than I can type. And all of those become options when you're commenting electronically. So if you're going to not use things in Canvas, you can get Microsoft Office. They can give you that paper. They can email it to you, upload it, whatever. You can use comments and track changes and embed comments and use it. And it's fine. It works. If you have students turn in PDFs, you can use sticky notes electronically in PDFs to call out certain sections and talk about them. But my encouragement for you, to echo what Mike was saying earlier, is just use Canvas. Keep everything for your course in this one place, because Canvas has so much better tools than eCollege and Blackboard. It really does. One of the things that you can do in Canvas, or in these other systems as well, and I know Mike mentioned this already, is you can actually focus on a small section. So you can pull up that document, but when you see the part of the argument that's an issue, you can go through and highlight that, or draw a box around it, and put your comment right next to it. And now that's great because the student can see the comment in the highlighted section, but it doesn't guarantee that the student's going to do with it what you want. So I'd also encourage you to teach your students how to read your comments. If you really want students to read your comments, though, you should integrate an activity that makes them do so. So we talked about syllabus, right? Make them read it, give them a quiz, give them a contract. I said for the assignment, you might want to give this activity where they have to ask questions. If you can require an activity that forces students to read your comments, they're actually going to read them, and they're going to read them much more carefully than they ever have before. Now, if you have lots of time over a semester, students can give you an outline of how they're going to revise, right? They can write up a plan, they can write you a letter. They can sit down and have a conference with you, sort of have that direct communication. In terms of Maymester, what I would recommend is, again, opening up a discussion board, or you can have them just email you directly in Canvas, so it's within the confines of the system, and give them a couple things that you want. Say, I'd like you to give me a 2-sentence summary of what my comment's focused on, and I'd like you to give me 3 bullet points that tell me what you're going to do in order to revise this paper. Comments are going to be most effective in context. So I've taken the lazy way out before, where I see my class has a huge problem with something, and I write up that paper, or I give instruction that's the whole class commentary. Most of your students are sitting there thinking, well, that's not me. And that's those other 29 people that he's talking about. That's why he said it's most of you. It's not me. And I would be that student as well. I would tune that out, because it's not about me. So the more commenting you can do in context of a document, in context of specifically that student, the more likely they're actually going to do something with your comments. Comments can also be supported by rubrics. Mostly what I want to say about rubrics are, you should have one. If you are going to comment, make sure you identify the issue. Sometimes what we think we're commenting on is so obvious to us that we don't actually tell the student. We're just saying, hey, why'd you say this? What do you mean, why did I say that? I said that because it was important. You told me to have, it's here. Tell them what the issue is. If you're asking them why they say it, explain why you are asking them this. If there's patterns, indicate them. Your goal really is, though, is to get the student to read the paper again, or perhaps for the first time, and to see that paper in a new way. So if you're focusing on, say, organization, and that this organization pattern isn't really something that's appropriate for your discipline or at this level, that this is a QIP and it functions in certain ways, or this is a policy memo statement and that functions in certain ways, then get them to see that's what you want them to notice. Right? Focus on how they're going to look at this differently. If you have time, you can think about providing steps to resolve the issue, giving students sample revisions, referencing additional sources, and I admit this, yes, this takes more time. Right? This is more work. But it is a place where if you've already handed out that sample of what this might look like, it's a place where you can say, hey, your argument here isn't doing what I needed to. Your analysis isn't working the way I needed to. Take a look at paragraph 2 in the sample that we have, and refer them to that. Get them to see that piece. If you are going to comment on things, you can also think about using a diminishing density of comments. And all that really means is, if you notice the student doing the same thing again and again, and let's pick on a lower order concern like comma splices. The student's doing this, 15 times in their paper. Maybe on the first comma splice you say, hey, I noticed this. This is a comma splice. Here's the problem with that. Go take a look at this link. Here's a link to the Writing Center stuff on comma splices. The next time you go through and see that, maybe it's a place where you say, hey, I noticed this again. Take a look at comment number 2 up there where I talked about this in detail. Maybe the third time you say, you know what? I've noticed this is a problem for you. I'm going to stop commenting here, but I expect you to go through and look for this throughout your paper. But it's that diminishing density of comments. So you've shown them what it is. You've talked to them about revision and value. But you've also then eliminated the need for you as the instructor to identify every instance. Because that's not helping the student, and it's surely killing off a huge chunk of your time. Your job is to let them know it's there, show them how to do it, and encourage them to go fix it. And my last little bit on rubrics. They're awesome. You can mirror and build your assignment verbs. So those course outcomes that you had are probably going to show up somewhere in your rubrics. Your assignment verbs that I talked about are going to show up somewhere in your rubric. They also help students complete your assignment better because students see what matters. So if you care about grammar and syntax and punctuation, that's awesome. Put it in your rubric. But tell them how much it's worth. Is that 5 points? Is that 30% of the grade? What is it? I've seen teachers in honors courses say, well, if you have more than 2 errors in your entire document, you fail it. If that's your rule, it's not really fair. But if that's your rule, it's got to be there, right? Tell them this so they know. Because I can guarantee you that student will then spend time proofreading it, and they're going to spend much less time writing it and thinking about the argument and the development and everything else that you're probably wanting them to do.